Support for this episode comes from the University of San Francisco's SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, better known as JSSJ. As trailblazers in formally linking Jewish studies with social justice, JSSJ is excited to announce the first ever graduate-level certificate in JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. This unique program gives professionals the opportunity to learn from scholars and activists, offering a blend of academic study and real-world application. So whether you want to expand your knowledge for personal development, boost skills and techniques in your classroom, or bring in valuable JEDI skills to your organization, this program will give you all the necessary tools and resources. Fall classes begin on August 27th. Learn more and apply now at usfca.edu/JEDI.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 382. What should Mitzvah be? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And this is our wrap-up episode on the Mitzvah series of episodes that we did, starting from the inspiration of the 101st anniversary of the very first Bat Mitzvah in the United States. So we're excited to look back at this series of episodes and what we're thinking about the Mitzvah. Before we do, just to mention that we now have a new page up on our website about our Unyeshiva certificate program. You can check it out and see all the amazing people that have been accepted into this certificate program who a few years from now will be certified Unbound Jews. So we're really excited for that. You can go to judaismunbound.com/certificate to read all about them. And while you're there, why don't you check out judaismunbound.com/donate. That's a place where you can make a generous donation to help us continue to create this podcast. So thanks so much for that. And now let's talk about the Mitzvah. Lex, I have been thinking about this a lot. I know you've been thinking about it a lot too. One thing that I just am struggling with is this question of, I'm struggling with it in myself because I know that both of the things that I'm about to say are basically wrong. And the first thing that I struggle with is this feeling that I have that I want to shout out to the world that the Mitzvah is fake, that it's not really a thing. And what I mean by that is that it didn't exist until 100 years ago. We think it's the 100th anniversary of the Bat Mitzvah, but it's basically the 100th anniversary of the Bar Mitzvah. The thing that we know today as the Mitzvah did not exist a little more than a century ago, that you became Mitzvah, Bar Mitzvah at that time. You became Bar Mitzvah when you woke up in the morning on your 13th birthday. And the Bar Mitzvah was at most that you would come up on Shabbat to the Torah and just say the blessing. You wouldn't read Torah. You wouldn't do any of that stuff. You would just say the blessing to kind of mark the occasion. It was kind of the Jewish version of singing happy birthday, that it's still your birthday, even if no one sings. But somehow that transmogrified itself into this much more significant set of things that people are expected to do and expected to know. And somehow the singing of happy birthday became imagined to be some kind of magical spell that makes you have the birthday. And I kind of want to say, I don't feel like we should be stuck with this thing because it's not ancient. On the other hand, what we talk about on Judaism Unbound all the time is that there should be new elements of Judaism that are created. And so, of course, I'm the biggest supporter of things that are not ancient being taken seriously as part of Judaism. So the fact that the Mitzvah is of relatively recent vintage should actually not be a strike against it. So I'm holding these two opposing ideas in mind. And I think the thing that I'm really struggling the most with is that I feel like people tend to feel stuck with the basic structure of the Mitzvah, and I wish that they didn't feel stuck with it because it's actually not that old. I think that if people realized that the Mitzvah was not ancient, they might feel freer to experiment with it.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm at. I mean, I am thrilled to hear you voice your tension. I have no tension. I'm only in the second category. I think it's great that Mitzvah was made up. And I say made up, I mean, you use the word fake. I think the word fake has necessarily negative connotation when you use it. It implies fraudulent. I don't think it's fraudulent. I think it's fake in the way that it's constructed. It's a ritual that was made up by people in the same way that all of our rituals are made up by people. And this one is a little more recent. I don't really want to go the route of emphasizing how new it is as a reason why people should not feel stuck with it, because I don't want people to feel stuck with old rituals either. And so if we make the argument of the reason why we should be free to experiment with Bar Mitzvah is that it's not that old. People are going to take away from that, well, like, oh, I guess things that are dating back all the way to the Torah, which Bar Mitzvah isn't, and Bar Mitzvah isn't. I want to be clear, like, we're not saying Bar Mitzvah, the gender neutral form, is new. We're saying the entire notion of a big event to mark 13 or 12-year-old entry into next stage of life. Like that idea of let's throw a big event is new. But like, I don't want to play that game, because then we're just re-enshrining this idea that ancientness is what gives things non-fake identity. That's what makes something real. And that means that everything we do now is not going to be real for another 1,000, 2,000 years, because it's going to have to become ancient. So I'd rather just say, this is new. Is it good or not? Given the question of, we have this big ritual in Jewish society, but also it's one of the few things that's known to not just Jewish society. What could it be? What is it? Like, how do we want to play with it? That's the set of questions I'm more excited about asking. And I do think it is at least mostly good. I think there are serious systematic issues with Bar Mitzvah. The ones I would identify, I think, are different from what a lot of Jewish educators identify. And speaking with Judaism Your Way and Tawanga and Labshul about what they are building has given me an energy that I haven't had in a while with respect to Bar Mitzvah. It's given me some hope. But they've all been pretty frank in naming just how different what they're doing is from the default that we've inherited. And that's not to say that every synagogue is doing stale, boring Bar Mitzvahs, but I do think there is still a pervasive issue of just processes that are about learning a set of Hebrew words, not what they mean, but how to say them, and just sort of checking a set of boxes. But like, I really love what Amichai Lau-Levi was talking about as the rite of passage. I think that we do need those as human beings. It would be so silly to look at one that became really prominent in Jewish life and say like, ugh, dang, I wish it had stayed smaller. At the same time, my tension is that I want to cherish 12, 13-year-old Bar Mitzvah. For me, I actually do think that having an initial one of these, although the first one is kind of baby naming, like when you enter the world, that's kind of the first Bar Mitzvah, or like at least some kind of rite of passage Jewishly. But having one at 0 and then one at 13 or 12 or whatever, it starts to make more sense when I conceptualize it as one rite of passage amidst many. I think that as long as you have one anchor moment, you could have the best curriculum, you could have the best process, you could have a really interesting set of values and practices and learnings that you do. As long as there's only one, people are going to feel like it's a graduation. Like you start unformed and you leave formed. And the reason I don't like that is not that I think people should feel some debt, so like they owe something to Judaism, like they have to keep participating. And if they think they don't have to participate, they've like done something bad. It's that I believe there's actually a wealth of learning and growth and meaning that can be found in Jewish material, in the blending of it with not just Jewish material. So I'm invested in the process of ritual making every 13 years. So, I mean, I've mentioned, I've done this in my own life. I had a Bar Mitzvah at 13. I was nearing 26 and I was like, I kind of feel like I'm at another new stage and I want to do something then. I'm halfway on my journey between 26 and 39, almost halfway. I'm going to do another one when I'm 39. If I make it there, but like if I make it to 52, if I make it to 65, like all of those things, I am planning to have rituals. And it's not because I'm selfish. It's not because I just want to have a party. It's because I think I will actually be at a different moment that deserves ritual marking. And I think everybody could benefit from that. You mentioned birthday parties. I have a birthday party every year to mark that passage of time. All the more so, I think doing it every once in a while to mark big life stage changes is also worthwhile. I'm just sitting with a vision of what if we really started to build a world where Bar Mitzvah was not sort of the moment alongside being born and like getting married. There's a whole other set of problems with how we center that ritual, but instead conceptualized it as one of a large number of rites of passage that we cement through Jewish prisms.
Okay, well, first of all, I agree with you very much, and I hope that we'll anchor a lot of our conversation on this about the rites of passage being the exciting thing. So I totally agree that there shouldn't only be one. I do want to say, although you set me up to be a bit of the fall guy on this one, but My response about the bar mitzvah is kind of, ugh, I wish we didn't have it. And I feel bad, being the Eeyore about that or whatever. But I do feel that still. And to me, the difference between a birthday party and a bar mitzvah is that everybody understands that a birthday party marks the passage of time. Like, I think that people are under a delusion that the bar mitzvah isn't about marking this moment. It's about causing this transition. It's a spell. If you don't have a bar mitzvah, you're not a real Jew. A lot of people have a notion like that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do believe the bar mitzvah itself, the actual ritual, whatever it is, does do things and doesn't just mark things. What you and I agree on is that it does not mark somebody going from not fully Jewish to fully Jewish, or not fully adult to fully adult.
Okay, so I'd love to explore what you think it does do, but I will say that back to my curmudgeon element here, there are practices, and we've talked about them on the show, like tashlich, that ritual on Rosh Hashanah where you symbolically throw your sins into a body of water in the form of bread, or kol nidre, the prayer on the night of Yom Kippur, where you say that all your vows for the next year are going to be nullified. These are practices that, when they emerged, were folk practices that the rabbis of that time tended to disparage and say, these are not good, these are not part of, this shouldn't be part of Judaism. And they were so powerful in the minds of the people that the people basically insisted to keep doing them. And so the rabbis eventually gave in and started to do them. There's a way in which you can also tell the story of the bar mitzvah that way. But it feels like the bar mitzvah went further than tashlich and kol nidre, to this place where eventually the people and then even the rabbis started to believe that it was so important that almost like it's not just something that we do, it's something that you must do. The way that we talked about it, that you also agree that it shouldn't be seen as the thing that makes you Jewish or not, but somehow it gained that status. And the thing that annoys me about it is that I feel like a lot of people and many rabbis have gotten to a point by now where they really do think that the bar mitzvah is critically important and that we can't muck around with it too much because it has to be a certain way. And that really kind of gets under my skin. If I were designing a life cycle from scratch and said, what are the milestones that we should have? What are the rites of passage that we should have at different points in life? This one would not be in the top 5. I'm not saying it wouldn't exist. Obviously, there's something about the transition from childhood to young adulthood or teenagerhood. We could talk about puberty. We can talk about other changes that are going on. Obviously, that is something that's important in the human life cycle. But in many, many, many ways, I don't think it's a transition that the person who is going through it at that age is actually getting much out of it at that time. And so I would say that if I were choosing it and we were saying, okay, let's have some rite of passage at that time, I would say, okay, yeah, top 10, sure. But make it a really small one because frankly, I don't think people at that age are really at a good age to have a really important milestone event happen in terms of how they remember it later in life and all that. I might be wrong about it, but that's kind of where I'm starting from.
I don't think I disagree with you very much. It goes back to what I was saying before. Like, let's diagnose why the rabbis you're talking about are responding the way they are, why they're so protective of this ritual. I believe they are so nervous about bar mitzvah specifically holding the space it does, because the alternative to having a big bar mitzvah is not having a big bar mitzvah. And that is equated with not having the solitary Jewish ritual about an individual that they play a role in shaping. Your baby naming is about you, but you don't shape it. But you're not able to do that on any level. Your wedding, again, just not everybody has a wedding, and the whole ways we've centered this Jewishly is a huge problem, but I'm just naming big ticket life cycle events that have been centered. So weddings, that is absolutely a big moment, but it is not about one person. It is about two people and their connection to each other. And so if you don't have a bar mitzvah, that is taken as basically you don't have the one thing. I don't think people really think it makes you a Jew. but they think it makes you a person who has had one hopefully meaningful experience holding Jewish space that is about themselves. And I agree that people need to have experiences in their life that are powerful to them, that they play a role in shaping, that are about them. If we lived in a world where having a 26va and a 39va and a 52va or whatever, or any version of this that's not just one time was normalized, the rabbis you're talking about, they wouldn't sweat it so much. Okay, so one life cycle moment out of a schema of 6 is not as big as it once was, for the sake of a bunch of other meaningful life cycle moments that will create the ability for people to grow and deepen and experience the world as Jews and as people at different stages in life. I don't think most people would struggle with that. It's just we don't live in that world yet.
Yeah.
So for the time being, saying we want to shrink Bar Mitzvah is saying we want to shrink the only ritual that is about like one Jew enshrining themselves in Jewish life. So my solution to that is make more.
Yeah.
If we rely on any one thing, I mean, it's like a monopoly we know that monopolies are harmful to society because when you center everything in one actor, they have too much power. They have too much control. They can abuse that control. And also, if something terrible happens to that monopoly, then I guess everything's gone now for that field. I don't think no form of Jewish meaning making and experience should be forcibly centered in one moment of life. I don't think that's an effective way to do anything. It creates pressure on that moment. And we see this. This is what we see in Jewish education. Everybody freaks out about Bar Mitzvah because that's basically the yes or no. Are they going to be Jewish? Are they going to not? And not because the educators or rabbis actually think that by going on the bima, they become a Jew. It's just by doing that process, they are doing a set of actions that could correlate with them caring about Jewish experience. So we want to invest in it. I don't know if I'm really arguing for shrinking it. I think by certain understandings of what a Bar Mitzvah is, I'm arguing for shrinking it. I think, but mostly I'm arguing for switching the contexts and changing it. It should be placed far more in individual 12 and 13-year-olds' hands. They should have agency over what space they use. That's what Judaism Your Way talked about. And I think that is so clearly the right way to do this. When somebody gets to choose where they're marking Jewish, where they're being, where they're living, where they're doing Jewish, they're going to want to be there. They've chosen it. They didn't choose the synagogue that their parents joined, by and large. We should make sure that it's customizable, that it's fitting people's interests, that we're not creating one rubric of what a Bar Mitzvah is, but rather we're creating one immense set of possibilities of launching points into how you might do it. Okay, so you might do a storytelling thing like Laptra. You might go into the woods and lead a nature hike if that's something that calls to you and you want to connect to Jewish stuff. You might do a prayer-centered thing. You might do it on a holiday because you really love a certain holiday and you want to do something cool. I could imagine people doing Hanukkah candle lightings and giving some words over, and that's their Bar Mitzvah. I haven't heard of anybody doing that. To me, that would be a beautiful thing to do. What would it look like if people actually were given the tools to be like, okay, you do pick every year where you want your birthday party to be. I know they're not the same, but we're going to give you the choice. And in doing so, we're going to allow you to not have this be polished and perfect. I think that's why we're so worried about giving 12 and 13-year-olds control, because we think that they have to do this thing that is going to ensure their continued participation in Jewish life or whatever. So if it's not carefully sculpted, then it's not going to stick. But if it doesn't need to stick for life and instead needs to stick for a little while until they do some other coming of age thing, maybe confirmation, I'd love to talk more about confirmation, then I think we would allow ourselves to do all of this experimentation and we'd liberate ourselves. It would be such a less pressure-packed, such a less continuity-driven ritual where we're doing something for the ability to salvage one Jewish body that will participate in the collective. I'm not that excited about that project.
Yeah, and it raises this question of just for example, the case of Hebrew. When you have a limited number of hours that a person is going to spend preparing for their Bar Mitzvah, why should they spend so many of those hours saying things in a language that they don't understand, having to memorize the tune of the reading of the Torah because we say you have to read it out of the actual Torah scroll and the notes aren't there, It's like, why can't they read it out of a book? Or like whatever the pieces are, it just feels like it's almost like a feat of strength that's being required of these people to prove something to the community, to prove that you can. And I understand that other people will have other more beautiful ways of saying why we do it. And I don't mean to disparage those, but it just feels to me like actually in a world in which these people will most likely never do this thing again, and they may never or rarely even be in the synagogue again, the question is, why do we require them to do these things? Now, if you are looking at the Bar Mitzvah...
Because we're hazing them.
Maybe, but I think that there's a more charitable view of it that says that the Bar Mitzvah, as we have it, it is a production of the synagogue. It's meant for the synagogue. And this is what I think, again, I don't think people understand this. I think that people think that that's what a Bar Mitzvah is. And what I really appreciate from Lab Shul and from Tawanga and from Judaism Your Way is they're not accepting that. They're saying, no, we don't accept that that's what a Bar Mitzvah is. We want a Bar Mitzvah to be a meaningful rite of passage for 12 and 13-year-olds and other ages as well. And they are on the road to discovering and to developing the right thing because they have rejected the inherent connection between the Bar Mitzvah rite of passage and the synagogue. But I understand it from the perspective of the synagogue. Like, I don't necessarily think that we should be calling on synagogues to change the Bar Mitzvah in their synagogue if they don't want to, because it's fair to say, like, yeah, we're raising synagogue Jews. Now, we might say to them, you're deluded because most of the people that you're raising are not going to be synagogue Jews. But I can understand them saying, but that's the Judaism that we believe in, and that's how we want to do it. What I would just be saying to all the other Jews out there, don't have your Bar Mitzvah there because this is not your kind of Judaism. Again, the mismatch that frustrates me is that people think that it has to be in a synagogue in order to be kosher, and so they do it, and the whole thing is warped from there and isn't really the rite of passage that they need.
Yeah, and honestly, this comes up in wedding officiation too. Like, I actually think a lot of people don't think it needs to be in a synagogue, but most people have somebody they care about in their life who does think it needs to be in a synagogue. And that person might be a parent, it might be a sibling, it might be a loved one, it might be a rabbi that they care a lot about and who they don't want to like alienate in some way. But we continually, for the sake of a few people that we care a lot about, we do things a certain way to meet what they're looking for, even when we might, in our perfect ideal world, sculpt a different kind of experience. I can't tell people like, have the arguments, have the fights with your family. Like, I can't force anybody to do that. I do think that we're just perpetuating a continual cycle where we enshrine this idea that to like be really Jewish is to check a certain small number of boxes over life, to have a circumcision if you're a boy and to have a baby naming if you're a girl. And I do specifically think that in some people's minds, it is the circumcision, it is the actual ritual act. We had earlier episodes of this podcast where we talked about why we should understand that differently. But you center all of Judaism onto basically 4 moments, which is very manageable over the scope of life. It makes everything easier. You concentrate the check boxes to circumcision/baby naming, Bar Mitzvah, wedding, and burial, being buried in a Jewish cemetery. If you do those 4 things, I think a lot of people are like, okay, that was one Jew. You did a Jewish life. And if you do only a couple of those things, but not all of them, people are like, oh, well, you didn't do the things that most clearly mark a Jewish life. Like, was that person not into being Jewish? Did they have, like, what's the deal? That's what we got to change. And the paradigm I'm offering is much more complicated. It's much harder. It actually asks more of people because I'm saying we should have a bunch of life cycles. Like, I'm saying ultimately that I want people to commit more. I think people see me saying like Bar Mitzvah should be less central as like, oh, you don't want this thing that is so central to Jewish life to be like, you're just doing Judaism light. No, I'm doing Judaism heavy. I'm saying we got to have more of all this, but in smaller doses with less pressure. I mean, I mentioned before, I think this is hazing. I mean that not in the abuse sense, but in the initiate, like when we talk about hazing, we fail to back out and say like, what are the arguments that people bring for why they are hazing? They're all bad arguments, to be clear. But the hazing that's happening in a fraternity context or in some kind of initiational process is, okay, we are putting you in close proximity to other people. We feel very strongly that you need to know those people. You need to know the traditions of the space. You need to know the history of the fraternity. You know the Greek words you're supposed to memorize and the historical dates and the whatever. And then the hazing goes along with that. There's ritual acts that are often abusive. From my perspective, hazing does not just refer to the actions of like harming people physically. It can refer to the psychological pressures, the loyalty pledges, the ways in which people are made to take certain moments of life as long-form, psychologically traumatic forms of connection to a collective. That's what we're doing with Mitzvah. Now, does it have to be harmful? No. I think we can have forms of familiarity with Jewish tradition that are not guilt-ridden and full of pressure. But as long as there's steps in this that are like, I know you don't want to learn Hebrew, but you have to. That's part of the process. You got to wear the pledge pin. We are subjecting a bunch of people at a formative age of life to a set of rituals that they don't really want to do a lot of the time.
But isn't that the difference between hazing and that? Because like with hazing with a fraternity, you're hazing people who have said, I want to be part of this fraternity, and it's still not right. But here, they didn't choose to.
We're leveraging this moment as a way to achieve a certain set of agendas of learning about Jews. And look, I'm a Jewish educator. I want people to love and connect with Jewish history, with traditions, with rituals, but I just can't be on board with mitzvah processes that are premised on, these kids don't want to do this, but like, we know what's right for them. They'll eventually be appreciative that we did this. We need to be aware of the dangers, the psychological traumas that can be interwoven with acts of initiation. The specific act of initiation is often where a lot of struggles come. I was in other contexts that were not fraternities where we had some really problematic, okay, if you're going to be in the club, you do these things. Were they abusive? Usually no, but they were coercive. And I think that these are coercive. And so let's make it less coercive. Let's say, what do you want this to be, 12-year-old? You actually have, and if we're worried about, if we make it less coercive, then it's going to achieve less of the continuity goals that we have about getting people to connect to Jewish institutions and become synagogue members and know how to follow the prayers, then my follow-up is, I don't love that agenda. But if you want to follow up on it, find ways to do that at a later age. Don't use the fact that these are people who are at a stage of life where they don't have control over where they drive on a Sunday morning. Don't use that as a coercive mechanism. Make this something that they want to participate in, or if they don't do it. I think JYW and Tawanga and Labshul, they have long waiting lists. I don't think that's just that parents want to coerce their kids into going. I think those kids want to be there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, on the hazing, I think it's a powerful analogy, and I think it should be explored. Just want to be clear, this is not true of everybody. In fact, my own children were very excited to have their mitzvah. Part of it was that it wasn't coercive. I mean, they were asked what they wanted to do, and they chose what they wanted to do. It turns out that they actually wanted to do quite a lot, and that's wonderful. And I actually said to my son, I remember saying to him, I don't know if you know what I do for a living, but I kind of think creatively about Judaism. And so your bar mitzvah could kind of be anything. Like, let's talk about what you want it to be. And he said, well, I think I'd like to read from the Torah and make a speech. So I was like, okay, that's fine. My question is whether that they are doing in this ritual is actually well suited to the objective that's trying to be met here. And maybe that's where we should really focus now, I think, is saying, what is this really about? And I think that to sort of take it out of the 13-year-old space for a moment and to think about rites of passage more generally may help us back into the 13-year-old situation in a new way. I feel like I'm going through a rite of passage time in my own life right now. I am a year away from being an empty nester, and I'm already feeling it in all kinds of ways. And so I'm feeling the beginnings of this passage. And it's not because of a certain age, by the way, right? If it should have happened to me a year ago if we were going by the 13. So that's why I'm not 100% on board for the 13 and 13 and 13. But it's like whenever it happens to you. And so what are the times in life that really feel like a passage? And becoming an empty nester clearly is one of them. And the interesting piece of it is that there's a internal dimension to it. Like, I'm sad that I'm going to be an empty nester. I'm also proud of my children. I'm also kind of like looking forward in a certain way, not to put any pressure on them, but that kind of means that I'll be maybe a grandfather sometime, not that far away from now. And all of these things start to make you think about your own life in different ways. And yeah, I would really value some kind of rite of passage to go through. And by the way, you talked earlier about the possibility that it could be a rite of passage with a group. And it might also be a rite of passage by myself. I think that both could be valuable. But the other piece of it is that, and this relates to, my new job, is that I felt like it wasn't like I was looking for something, but when I started to think about the possibility of doing something new, part of how I was thinking about it was, I'm about to have no kids in the house to occupy my days with and to be responsible for. And I still feel young. Like I still feel like I have a lot of energy. I don't want to just kind of coast towards retirement. I want to do something actually that requires a lot of energy and a lot of creativity from me. And not that, if this hadn't happened and I'd stayed at Judaism Unbound in the same way, like, of course, we would be doing all these creative things. And maybe I would have brought that energy to be even more creative with Judaism Unbound. But there was something appealing to me to say, like, yeah, I'm actually ready for a new role in the world. And so the idea that the rite of passage is both internal and relates to your role in the world feels really powerful to me. And it's also where I kind of feel like it falls flat in the 13-year-old Bar Mitzvah, because you're saying to somebody, yeah, they are going through an internal rite of passage, an internal passage, right, in terms of like puberty. I'm not sure that they're totally ready to reflect on it, but I'm not sure that the external rite of passage or the external passage is really something that they're doing yet. You can talk about how, yes, being a high schooler is different than being a middle schooler, and that's true, but it's not sort of dramatic in the same way. Whereas like saying that somebody who's going to college is now getting ready for a new way of living in the world is probably true. If somebody's about to become a parent, to get a new first job, and there are all kinds of times in life that feel more realistic that you're saying this person is actually going to play a different role in the world. So I'm wondering, like, if we can think about the rites of passage as both internal and external, if that helps us think about what the rite of passage is trying to be about, and that might help us think about what the content of it is.
So I continue to hold pretty strongly that 13-year-olds are more ready for more life skills and forms of leadership than we give them credit. And I don't think you're denying that. I do still, as I say that, agree with you that the idea that what this is at 13, you are going from not part of a group that is like fully able to lead or do certain things to now I'm fully there. I struggle with that. I'm thinking at my summer camp, I keep on flashing to my summer camp throughout this entire unit, because when I think about coming of age, like that's where it most truly happened. I got the entire journey from basically baby. Like an 8-year-old at summer camp is a baby. They're the youngest one there, in the way that a baby in the rest of the world is the youngest one there. And then I went through the whole journey to like elder staff. I was a 3rd-year staff and I was older than most of the other staff. I was in effect like an 85-year-old in that context. And I experienced that all in 13 years of summer camp. Interesting. I was there for 13 years. I didn't do that on purpose, but that's, a fun little Bar Mitzvah tie-in. I am thinking about at my summer camp, the 10th graders. And the rumor of how this started is that one summer, all the staff went on strike. I don't know if this is true or not, or if it's like an urban legend. There's a rumor that the staff all went on strike. And so literally there are a bunch of unwatched kids. Like, what do? The oldest campers, the 10th graders, for like a day were they were placed in a position where they needed to like step up a little bit. And so as a result of that moment, whether it happened or not, this might be fully made up. Somebody from Interlock can tell me. But like they created an annual thing called KTO, Kafar Takes Over. Kafar is the oldest group. And so one day at camp, the 10th graders are the counselors. The staff are segmented off there are a couple staff floating around making sure nothing happens, but they're like silent. They're just like making sure nobody gets physically injured. They're leaving things in charge of the 10th graders. And it's not because 10th graders are ready to be camp counselors. They are not. They should not be. I want it to be clear. I'm not endorsing 15-year-olds being charged with 8 and 9-year-olds. But they get a sense of, wow, that was tough. There are things that I hadn't thought about, which the staff have to think about. And like, I'm thinking in a few years, I might be a staff member at this same camp. And I got a little taste. And now I have a sense of like, oh, wow, this really is exciting for me. And it's going to be harder than I thought. Maybe there's things that I loved that I didn't expect to love. And then it's done. And then you got a few more years. And then you're a counselor in training and a staff. To me, that's what we could function with in Be Mitzvah into confirmation. I want to talk about confirmation. I think confirmation has this terrible reputation among most Jews today, across the board. It's a Reform-founded Jewish tradition. It's a Christian origin tradition. I think for that reason, people love to trash it. People love to trash things that come from Christianity and end up impacting Judaism. I think sometimes it's really harmful. Other times it's really good. I think confirmation is a powerful idea that takes notions of coming of age and instead of centering it on one individual with one day, it becomes a year-long process. Confirmation is usually about an entire year experience, and it's a communal experience. It's a cohort experience. Some of the groups we talk to, they do cohort experiences for their Bar Mitzvah. I think that is very wise. I think having this be a moment to grow with other Jews, with other people, should be the point. None of us exist in the world on our own. I think that if we saw Bar Mitzvah as, okay, you're getting a little taste, but then confirmation a few years later in high school, that's really when you are closer to an adult. And you really are able to analyze the world and come up with your own interpretations in an even deeper way than seventh graders are. If we saw this as a 1-2 punch, Bar Mitzvah into confirmation, and synagogues try to do this, and I get that there's logistical challenges, people leave after Bar Mitzvah, but if we really made confirmation the crowning achievement, that might be a way to think about this. Or, by the way, if we didn't do it with confirmation, but just made Bar Mitzvah at a later age, one of the, the passage program that Amichai talked about. Like, I actually think adult Bar Mitzvah, when it's done in congregations, is almost identical to confirmation. It's a group of people spending time learning together, and then they do some kind of shared service or shared public thing for their community. That's what confirmation is. So that notion, that idea, is a really good one that makes it not so much about one individual, but about a group. And it creates a later stage while you're still an adolescent to sort of flex your Jewish leadership skills.
Yeah, like if I had my druthers, right, I would call, if we had to retain the institution of Bar Mitzvah, I would just move that to a later age and call the younger thing something else. If we, because I'm all for the younger thing. I mean, there are other rites of passage too. Like, we haven't really talked about the Bar Mitzvah as a rite of passage for the parents of the kid. And there are, when you think about a younger kid, there are certain events, like I think about in Jewish day schools for sure, but I think also in kind of Hebrew schools and after schools sometimes, there are ceremonies for, I think, like kindergartners.
Consecration.
Well, okay, I don't know the name of it. But you get your like first Siddur or something. Is the kid going to remember that? I mean, is it, like, first of all, it's fine if they don't remember it for their whole life, but really, are they even going to remember it next week? Maybe. But in many cases, no, and it won't make a huge impression. But the parents remember it. So in a sense, it's a parent rite of passage masquerading as a child rite of passage, right? And there may be an extent to which the Bar Mitzvah as we have it is that as well. And I take that seriously. I mean, I'm thinking about a ceremony like those 5-year-old consecration or whatever. I think all those kids, I mean, I shouldn't say all because some of them probably have stage fright and they really don't even like to walk across the stage and get their Siddur. But I think for the most part, my impression from the outside is that they seem to all be enjoying themselves. Whereas at the Bar Mitzvah, it feels like a lot of those kids aren't enjoying themselves. What would it look like if the Bar Mitzvah was something that all kids looked forward to, every part of it, that they just felt like, I'm so proud, I'm so excited to have this, and it will be a positive memory as opposed to this memory that they got through. You sent me, this is the right time to talk about it, I think. You sent me this conversation between Howard Stern and Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
That, you want to describe it for a minute?
I mean, it's not really conversation. I mean, it's part of a conversation, but literally Howard Stern is talking about Bar Mitzvah. Adam Sandler has a movie about Bar Mitzvah coming out in a few months. And so he's doing the rounds on different shows. He's on Howard Stern's show. And Howard Stern goes, watch this. I haven't even talked to Adam, but I'm going to say something, listeners, and he's going to respond. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach. And Adam Sandler goes, immediately, Baruch Adonai Baruch V'Omed. They both know exactly what to do. They chant the whole Torah blessing. This, by the way, for those who aren't familiar, is the blessing before the Torah. I forget if they did the before or after the Torah one. But they chant the whole thing, and the whole thing they're talking about is neither of them knows what it means.
They say it perfectly, by the way.
Yeah, they do it exactly right. These are people that are often, talked about as, oh, yeah, sure, they're Jews, but they don't really care about like Jewish stuff. Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song is just a list of Jews. Like, they know the thing. They experienced this, and it was nothing for them. It would be better to have nothing in a certain sense, because then there'd be a gap and they might want to try and fill it. But this is like, it was a substantive thing in their life that was so vapid and so actively not geared towards meaning making that it leaves a crappy mark on how you associate Jewishness. I do think, by and large, we have improved, even in synagogue contexts. We've improved. But sorry, that was the description of the thing.
No, yeah, but so it just, if you're assessing the Bar Mitzvah, you look at that and say, oh, what a success! They both know this blessing perfectly, incredible, right? And in years, decades after their Bar Mitzvahs, they know it perfectly. And the other part is like, first of all, they say they don't understand any of it. They don't know what it means. It doesn't mean anything to them. And that's kind of a bummer. And then you also wonder, like, do they look upon that experience fondly, or do they look upon that experience as something they had to get through in life? And I think it's something more like that one. So the alternative is to imagine them having the same conversation. And I guess they probably wouldn't have it on the Howard Stern show because it wouldn't be as funny. But they have this conversation where they're like, do you remember your bar mitzvah? And he says, yeah, that was the greatest moment of my life. I don't remember the details, but I remember the feeling that I was being embraced into this community, that I was being taken seriously, whatever they say, right? That I was able to think about the things that I've cared about. And actually, I remember that at my bar mitzvah, we went to work at a homeless shelter. And actually, I've been working at a homeless shelter every Saturday ever since, or something, right? That would be a thing where you would say, wow, what an amazing achievement this rite of passage is. And so it feels to me like we can have that. And actually, there would be nothing violated in Judaism if it was like that. And it's almost like everything to gain. So it feels to me like maybe one of the, as I'm starting to think, like as we're getting towards the end of this conversation, I'm starting to think like, what would be the design principles of Jewish rites of passage? First thing that I'm thinking about is that it should be positive. It should be something that at that time of your life feels like a gift and not that feels like a burden. And the other piece of it is, to my mind, that it should feel like it helped you navigate this internal thing that you're going through. So, for example, in the case of empty nesters, I think probably doing it as a group is the right thing, because I think part of what I would feel would be helpful to me at this phase of life would be talking to other people that are going through the same thing. For a young child, a 5-year-old in their, consecration, or even a 12 or 13-year-old in their bar mitzvah, I'm not sure that talking to a group is what they need. It may be and may not be. I'm not sure. So it's, what do you need for the passage that you're going through internally? And then what would be an external manifestation that would fit with the way that your role externally is changing? So I love what you were talking about is the camp takeover day. You're sort of role modeling being a counselor. That fits. That makes sense as the day that you acted like the thing that you're not quite there yet.
And that's also super exciting. Like the 10th graders, the entire summer, they're looking like that's like the crowning day of 10th grade, because you are empowered in the deepest way you can be for a day at summer camp. It's very cool. I have a couple of final thoughts, but basically they boil down to a few things. First off, my mom was the chair of the board of Make-A-Wish Wisconsin when I was growing up. And so I got to know Make-A-Wish very well. I volunteered there a lot. And I'm imagining a world where like you would meet with a wish kid at the beginning and be like, so here's what your wish is. We have a wish that we've designed based on a few thousand years of tradition of the best wish for somebody who's dealing with serious life-threatening illness. So this is what your wish is. And we give it to a few hundred children a year. That would be ludicrous. You start the wish, and it's like, if you had any wish, what would you want to happen for you? There's ways that people, for very young ages and for older ages, they help steer people in different directions and thought process and what they might want for their Make-A-Wish wish to be. And then there's all sorts of processes to make that a dream event. And it often is actually a life cycle. I mean, a lot of these people do survive, and it becomes a really important rite of passage in their lives. I mean, getting through cancer or getting through, that's deep. That's number one. Is we should understand the first meeting. Like, how do we kick this off? People should be relishing, like the 11-year-old who knows when they turn 12, they're going to have that first meeting about what their bar mitzvah is. They should be so jazzed. They should be in school fantasizing, writing in their journals, whatever, like about, they've seen 14 different Jewish kinds of ceremonies and things for bar mitzvahs from their older brother's friends or whatever. And they should be fantasizing about what that would be. I don't think that's impossible. I actually think that if people were given the keys to the car and empowered to shape their own ceremonies, for somebody who loves volleyball, to bring all their friends to a volleyball court and to think about what it is to serve and set up others in the world and how we serve it. But also sometimes you have to take the space and spike it. And like, that's part of what I'm growing into, is I'm taking up more space in the world and learning how to lead in space. Like, that's just top of mind, somebody who liked volleyball. I'm not a volleyball guy. That's the first one. We should be creating that, and it should be hard. Every individual experience, for those who are shepherding it, for the tutors, for the staff, for the leaders that are stewarding it, it should be like, oh wow, I have to go learn about whatever this kid's passion is, so I can find the Jewish connections there and make this event happen. It should be a real effort, and it should be a community effort. Just as Tawanga mentioned, there should be loved ones and people that are connected to this person that are helping with that. It should be a collective experience. Like, all of that would be so powerful, as opposed to, here's the binder. You're going to have, these prayers you have to learn, these values to familiarize with. That's what we got to shift. And so I want to close just by like I do want to have some like positive vision of what I would dream of in the world. If I were to choose a moment of the Jewish calendar to consider centering bar mitzvah celebrations commonly, I would move it away from the Saturday morning service. I think the Saturday morning service, where the Torah is read, is among the least conducive moments for what I want to achieve. Others might want to achieve different things. I want to help 12 and 13-year-olds for the first time in their life build their own Jewish experience and welcome other people to it. I do, in fact, think that is possible. I don't think they're too young for it. I think they would need help and support, but I think it's possible, and I've seen it happen. I believe that Saturday morning service, which has the longest liturgy, it has the most number of things that are like, oh, well, you kind of have to do Shema. Oh, you kind of have to do Bar. Oh, you kind of have to do, like, the have-dos are already like an hour and a half. It's too long already. And then if you want to have any amount of your own twist on it, it's just not going to happen. Or it's going to happen very minimally, especially because you also want the parents to give their speeches and their beautiful, tearful speeches. Like, Havdalah, Saturday night, is 4 blessings. They're each, the first 3 are 1 line, and the last one is kind of 2 lines, or it's like an extended 1 line. If you centered bar mitzvah on Havdalah, of necessity, it would force the experience to be not just about the blessings. Because they're done. If you just do the blessings, they're done in like 3 minutes. So you would have to say, oh, okay, there's 4 blessings. There's the wine blessing. Okay, there's the fire blessing. Being able to light a flame, like, that's actually, when you're a 12 or 13-year-old, like, I don't want to call it playing with fire. I don't want this to be dangerous. I want this to be safe. But like, getting to do a ritual where you are facilitating the lighting of fire, that's actually not something that most 12-year-olds have been allowed to do. It's like it's short enough that you can sing stuff together. Even if people don't know it, you can quick teach. Then the whole thing would be about what the student brings. What week is it? Okay, it's this Torah portion. There could still be a Devar Torah in the way that there are on Saturday mornings. We could make this experience centered on one of the most sensory, one of the most magical, and I mean that in like the capital M magical sense of transformational, spellbinding. We could put bar mitzvah there, and then we could allow for people to make the magic be whatever they say in between the blessings, before the blessings, after the blessings, the experience they create. Do they have a meditation? Do they lead a group conversation? Do they bring in some favorite songs of theirs that are pop songs? I don't know. That's the kind of move that I think could make this more powerful, precisely because it would actually center the event on not learning a bunch of liturgy. You'd learn 4 blessings that are each very, very short. I think that could be a really positive move if anybody out there feels called to it.
I think that we've only scratched the surface of the possible creativity that could be done. I think that the message is that we'd be excited if people were using more creativity. In other words, if people didn't feel, like you were just talking about, if people didn't feel bound so to speak, to the Saturday morning service as they do. Of course, people say, no, we have opportunities for bar mitzvahs at other times. Like, yeah, but we still are centering it on the Saturday service for the most part. So what would it look like if we didn't make that association between the bar mitzvah and the Saturday morning service at all? We just knew bar mitzvahs could be any day of the week. Bar mitzvahs could be any place. Could be Havdalah is the one that usually is, etc. What would that look like? And what would it look like if we did what Amichai Lau-Levi is talking about? I'm so fascinated by a world in which synagogues are, or, not synagogues, maybe it's the thing that comes to, succeed synagogues, but that they're built around rites of passage as the organizing principle. And yeah, we also do services. That it would be fascinating. And all of these things, I think that once you kind of break the assumption that things have to be a certain way, it opens up these doors to creativity that are really very traditional. And that's the thing I think that I was struggling to say at the beginning, that I think that this kind of creativity that we're talking about, it would be no less traditional than the creation of the bar mitzvah in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so why should we feel that kind of creativity isn't the role of our generation? I think it is.
Yeah, the creative impulse to bring something new into bar mitzvah. Yeah, it's exactly what we've been doing with this ritual for quite a long time. The ways in which people make Jewish ritual their own is very much our bread and butter and what we want to encourage. And my hope is that whatever age you are, whatever stage of life you're in, I mean, you mentioned that for you it wasn't 52, it wasn't a multiple of 13, so this system of mine might not work. I'm not that wedded to the precise rhythm of every 13 years you have a rite of passage. I am pretty wedded, pun sort of intended, to rhythmic marking of the passage of time. There's never a moment of life that doesn't feel like a transition on some level. I believe in the act of like, okay, I'm 26 now, so I'm going to make this, I'm going to notice whatever transitional moment I'm in. I'm 52 now, that's a multiple of 30, I'm going to find. But of course, Dan, I'm kind of hoping that a year from now, you will actually do some kind of ritual, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's in your community. I'd love to go. I'd love to help. But like, I think that would be an empowering thing. I will tell listeners right now, I'll say it on the record. I plan when I'm 39 to do my next stage bar mitzvah. We'll see what it looks like. Mostly, I actually want, non-rhetorically, I'm not saying this just to say a nice thing at the end of the episode. I really would love each of you out there to feel called. If there's a moment that you're experiencing right now of transition, maybe you've thought about it as a Jewish transition, maybe you haven't. But I want you to take a second, like breathe it in, notice the transition and ask, could I actually mark this? Whether it's just for me, you don't have to invite other people. It doesn't have to be some event that you invite people to. My 26th was just me and to some extent me with my wife. But there's a chance to say, I'm going to meaningfully create a self-guided syllabus. I'm going to do some reading. I'm going to do some learning. I'm going to do some experiencing in the world. Maybe actually do it. And when you do, send us a note. You now have 2 listening ears that are ready to receive whatever you do, so you don't feel like you're just doing it into a vacuum. So please, whatever age you are, do, whether you call it an adult bar mitzvah or just a rite of passage, through a Jewish lens. Let us know how it goes, because we'd love to have that influence our own future thinking about this and the world that we want to create. So that's a long way of saying, as we always do at the end of episodes, like, please be in touch with us, whether it's directly about that or about anything else that came up today, questions you have, debates you want to have with me or with Dan. If you think that it's outrageous that I called bar mitzvah similar to hazing, I stand by that, but I also want to name, like, it's not, I said it was fake. The same terrible. Yeah, and Dan said it was fake. I think it's worth noticing the ways in which this overlaps with elements of initiation rituals that contain hazing. But seriously, always be in touch with us. You can do so in a whole bunch of different ways. First, via our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. All of those are at Judaism Unbound for our handles. You can head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, where you can check out all sorts of things. But currently, you can check out our certificate cohort, our new first inaugural cohort of the Unyeshiva's certificate program. You can see who those 14 amazing souls are. They're really, really awesome. You can also see the show notes for this episode and all our other episodes at JudaismUnbound.com/podcast. And of course, you can donate to us at JudaismUnbound.com/donate and email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. The last thing that I'll say is that support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Ashman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Ashman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.